Hi, I'm Michelle the Irritable Vegan. I'm here to share my vegan love FODMAP story and hopefully take some of the BS out of IBS. And today's topic is one that I never in a million years imagined I'd be discussing with all you lovely people on the internet. My colonoscopy story. Let's get into it. Welcome to my colon, people.
Oh my God.
You get the idea. So for all you delicate flowers out there, I think we better start today's video with a little bit of a trigger warning. I am going to be speaking in depth about an invasive medical procedure, bodily functions and my bottom. So if you're overly offended by any or all of those, then this is not the video for you. Thanks for watching and I'll speak to you soon. Is there anybody still out there? If you are, I'm assuming that means that you're going to be okay with all the gory details, but before we get into those, I think we better rewind a little bit and give you some background story. So some of you may have watched my IBS story, which I believe was the first video I did for this channel. If not, I'll leave a link above and below, but I'm going to start this story back in the summer of 2017. And by that point, I'd been vegan for about 18 months and my IBS symptoms had been gradually getting worse and worse and worse, to the point where I decided enough was enough and I really needed to start getting some answers to all the things that I was experiencing. So following numerous tests to rule out anything more sinister, we did blood tests, several fecal sample tests and even a small bowel study MRI scan, my gastroenterologist decided that the next logical step would be a colonoscopy. So I received my colonoscopy appointment for the 11th of June 2017. So along with my appointment, I received a patient information leaflet just describing the procedure of a colonoscopy, explaining everything that was going to happen before and after the procedure. There was a patient consent form that needed to be filled in and signed, and a pre-procedure questionnaire, which is basically if you've ever had any kind of medical procedure done, it's a very straightforward form, just asking you to list any major health problems, any medication you're currently taking and any allergies or sensitivities. So without wanting to scare anybody off, some of the side effects and risks associated with a colonoscopy include things like discomfort, bloating and abdominal pain, which if we're undergoing a colonoscopy, I'm pretty sure that we're familiar with one or all of those symptoms already. Some of the major but more rare side effects include side effects from being sedated, which may include breathing or blood pressure problems, bleeding or perforation of the bowel, which is rare but higher in instances where they need to remove a polyp, and also missed lesions, which is, they say, infrequent. The risks are higher if the bowel preparation has been poor and they haven't been able to have access to the entire length of the bowel, and they're basically saying that they're not held responsible for misdiagnosing or for anything going undiagnosed. All in all, that sounds a little bit scary, but they do need to cover themselves legally and make you aware of the possibilities. And basically you're provided with enough information for you to decide whether or not you're happy to go ahead with the colonoscopy, and if you are, to provide a signature which states that you've read and understood all the possible complications and side effects which can go along with having a medical procedure. So it's all fairly standard stuff. Now moving on to the days just prior to the procedure, where you're required to take a bowel prep solution. Now the purpose of this is to clear your colon out completely in order for the colonoscope to be able to pass through where it needs to go and to be able to inspect all areas of the bowel safely. So for me, this was basically one of the most inconvenient parts of the whole procedure. I was given a hospital prescription for the Bowel Prep solution, and at the time I was actually working as a pharmacy dispenser within a community pharmacy. But you may or may not be aware that a community pharmacy are unable to dispense hospital prescriptions. So this is the first tip for you. If you are given a prescription from your gastroenterologist for the Bowel Prep solution, if possible, get it there and then on the day, because you will not be able to have that dispensed at your local community pharmacy. You will need to visit the hospital pharmacy. So just to save yourself a trip, if you can get that prescription on the day. So I had to take time away from work in a pharmacy to visit a hospital pharmacy in order to get the prescription fulfilled. And this may not apply to everybody. Some people, I understand, receive the MoviPrep solution by post, and others will be asked to visit their GP to receive a regular green prescription which they can have fulfilled at any local community pharmacy. But just be aware that there are several ways that the MoviPrep solution may be authorised to you. So let's fast forward to 48 hours before the procedure. And for myself, I was eating a vegan whole foods diet, lots of whole grains, lots of legumes, lots of nuts and seeds, lots of fresh fruit and vegetables. And I was actually advised that for 48 hours before to switch to what would normally be considered the exact opposite of a diet suitable for your colon health. So a very low fibre diet, switching to things like white rice, white pasta, white bread, to cut out all fibrous fruits and vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and really allow your colon some time to rest, and eating foods that are going to be much more easily cleared from your system when you do begin to take the Bowel Prep solution. So fast forward to 24 hours before the procedure. My procedure was scheduled to take place at 1 p.m, so I was advised that from 1 p.m the day before not to eat any solid foods. So you can still have liquids, so you can have things like water, herbal tea, black tea and coffee. You are allowed to use a little bit of sugar if you take it. Things like clear soups, clear broths, anything basically that is a clear liquid, you are still allowed to consume. And they do ask you to avoid things which are highly coloured, such as blackcurrant juice, beetroot juice, cranberry juice, basically anything that could potentially stain the inside of the bowel, but also anything that could be potentially misidentified as blood during the colonoscopy. So now we're getting into the nitty-gritty, the actual bowel prep procedure. So from being asked to fast from 1 p.m the day prior, you're then asked at 7 p.m to begin taking the Bowel Prep solution. Now I was given a product called MoviPrep, you may be given something different, but it's essentially 2 separate powders which are mixed together in a litre of water to make a pretty foul tasting solution. Now I'm not going to lie to you, it's pretty vile, but it is definitely doable, and you can drink it alongside a glass of cordial. So I found that if I had the litre of prep, I had a glass of cordial, and I would take sips, alternate sips from each. It's not the nicest thing you'll ever be asked to drink. I thought it tasted like a very citrus version of a rehydration salt. So it was salty, it was sweet, it was sour. But taking it alternate with a sip of cordial, it was definitely manageable. So you're asked to drink the 1 litre solution over the course of 1 to 2 hours, and once you're getting down to the last few hundred mils, you can expect it to take about 45 minutes to an hour for the solution to actually take effect. And then once it takes effect, you can expect it to continue working for approximately 2 hours until your bowel is fully empty. And if I'm being perfectly honest, for me this was probably the worst part of the whole experience. Even the initial drinking of the fluid, I'm the first person to admit that I am usually on the dehydrated side. I don't drink enough fluids through the day, so I do find drinking a whole litre of fluid pretty much in one go very difficult to manage. And then mixed again with the cordial, it was probably more like 2 litres of fluid. Now for me, I would never ever normally drink 2 litres of fluid over the course of 1 to 2 hours. So I found that I was getting very full and very uncomfortable, and it was a bit of a chore literally just to keep drinking. So that was the beginning of the worst part of the whole procedure for me. So the idea of the 7 p.m. timing is that you will have drunk all of the solution, it will begun to take effect, and you will have your bowel fully cleared before it's bedtime around 11 p.m. So then hopefully you're going to get a good night's sleep. And thankfully for me, this is exactly how it worked. I'd begun to take the solution just before 7 p.m. By about 8:15, 8:30, the solution had begun to take full effect, and from that point on it was absolute carnage. But then by about 10:30 it was settling down, and surprisingly I managed to make it all through the night without needing to go back to the toilet, and managed to get a good night's sleep, which I wasn't expecting at all, because when you're right there in the middle of the solution taking effect, it can literally feel like it's never going to end and that you think there's no way you're going to be able to sleep that night. So another trigger warning, from this point on I am going to start to get a little bit more graphic about the experience of the bowel prep and the procedure as a whole. So basically the effects of the bowel prep solution are very similar to if you've ever experienced a really severe bout of food poisoning. Now for myself, I'm somebody that's used to frequent diarrhoea, I'm somebody that's used to opening my bowels numerous times a day, but even I found the extent of the bowel prep solution, the extent of its effects, quite shocking. And by the end of it I was feeling very drained, I was feeling a little bit shaky, a little bit lightheaded. So basically everything that is in your bowel is evacuated over the course of 1 to 3 hours in the form of liquid. It's evacuated fully and forcefully, and the whole thing can leave you really quite shaken. Now if you're somebody that suffers with IBS-C, or you're somebody that's not used to going to the toilet very often, you may actually find that once the initial shocking period has passed, that you might actually feel a little bit better, because you're probably going to be emptier than you've ever been before. And all I can say to you is that it is not going to be a permanent state, it's not going to last forever. You just need to get through those 1 to 3 hours and it's going to be over and done with until the following day. And depending on the timing of your procedure, I was actually asked to take a 2 litre of the bowel prep solution at 6 a.m. the morning of the procedure. Now this will vary for some people depending on which appointment you've been given, but I was asked to take another litre of fluid, and I will say that this second bowel prep solution is in no way as dramatic as the first, because I was really worried about the fact that I may still be wanting to open my bowels on the journey to the hospital or even while they were doing the procedure, and it's definitely not like that. The biggest effect from the solution is the night before, and then the morning of. It still works in the same way, but because you haven't eaten anything for almost 24 hours before, that there isn't as much in there to get rid of, so it really is just clearing out the last dregs of anything that might be in there. And it's definitely not as strenuous, and it's definitely not as taxing as it is the night before. Now again, the timing of that being at 6 a.m. is designed that dependent on the time of your procedure, you've got time to take the solution, for it to work, for your evacuation process to be complete before you need to then start travelling towards your appointment. Now if you are somebody that does rely on public transport, or you do need to leave the house considerably earlier than your appointment time, it might be worth actually discussing that with your gastroenterologist and trying to organise an appointment time that's suitable, taking into consideration those facts, because you do want to make sure that you have completely finished the evacuation process before you attempt to travel to your appointment. And for me, that was probably one of the things that I was the most worried about, the idea that the evacuation process might not be complete before I needed to leave the house for my appointment. But just as the night before, the timings all worked exactly as explained, and I felt a little bit apprehensive and a little bit nervous leading up to the appointment, but I also felt confident that I wasn't going to need to dramatically and drastically open my bowels on the way to the hospital. So I would also say at this point that to turn up to your appointment prepared just in case you do need to open your bowels once you arrive at the hospital. So things like moist toilet tissue and like refreshing wipes and maybe a change of underwear, you know, just having little things like that in your bag. You may not need to use them, but just knowing that you've got them may help just settle your mind a little bit and take away just a little bit of the stress. And then obviously once you get there, there are toilets available. You're usually going to be on a ward that specialises in colonoscopies, so they're going to be well aware of everything that you've been through over the last 24 hours. So there are always toilet facilities available, and they'll be more than used to seeing people backwards and forwards to the toilet. And at that point, I just kept feeling as if I needed to go, but like there was nothing left to give. So that may be different for everybody, but I attempted a couple of times while I was in the waiting room to go to the toilet, but there was literally nothing left. I think it was just the spasms of the colon because of everything it had been through over the last 24 hours. So when I actually arrived at the hospital, there was a lot of paperwork to take care of, so I would recommend that you do arrive in plenty of time for your appointment. You don't want to be delaying the rest of the patients, you don't want to be delaying the staff, and you just want to be able to give yourself time to ask any questions and to run through the paperwork in the most stress-free, relaxed manner possible. So once again, you go through all your pre-procedure questionnaire, you go through your consent form, and it was at this point that I probably felt the most uncomfortable during the whole time. And that was basically because I'd opted for sedation. You are given the option for sedation or non-sedation, and I'd opted for sedation on the recommendation of other people, and I was sitting with the nurse filling in the paperwork, and it was the only point where I felt as if I'd somehow personally offended the intake nurse. And basically she was a little bit abrupt when I told her that I had opted for sedation, and she then kind of fussed around, and there was quite a bit more paperwork involved with the sedation process. And it was only at that point that I was actually given the information regarding a colonoscopy under sedation. And fortunately for me, I was able to meet all the criteria of the sedation. Now, if you've driven yourself to your appointment, you will not be allowed to be sedated. If you need to go to work the day following the appointment, if you have very young children which you're going to need to transport around, that you're going to need to be responsible for, and there isn't another responsible adult available to help, then you wouldn't be allowed the sedation, because you basically have to consent to the fact that from the point of receiving the sedation for 24 hours, you will not drive, you will not operate machinery, you will not be responsible for others, you will have a responsible adult monitoring you and available to you for the next 24 hours. And it even goes so far to say as that you're not to sign any official paperwork or documents. So if you're unable to fulfill any of those criteria, then you will not be allowed to have the sedation. Now, luckily for me, I was able to fulfill all of that. And I think that was a little bit to the disappointment of the intake nurse, because I think she definitely would have preferred me not to have the sedation. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later on. I did have to make a very hurried phone call to my boss because I was unaware that I wouldn't be able to work due to the nature of my work the following day. So luckily I got that all sorted. So I would just say that if you know for sure that you do want to have sedation before the procedure, then you do need to make sure you've got all those things in place. So you need to rest completely for 24 hours after. It's unlikely you'll be able to go to work, it's unlikely you'll be able to look after young children, and you definitely won't be able to drive yourself home after the procedure. So you just need to kind of take care of that and not be surprised by that information when you literally sat there at your appointment, which is what happened to me. So then once all the paperwork was signed and in place, I was shown through to a changing room, I was handed a gown, and I was given a pair of what can only be described as navy blue paper assless Bermuda shorts. And they're a knee-length paper disposable short with a very strategic slit up the back, which is kind of enveloped across itself, obviously to allow the consultant access to
Oh my God.
You get the idea. So I waited for about half an hour before I was taken through to the procedure room. There were 3 female nurses in there. They were absolutely lovely. They were chatty. They immediately put me at ease. They were just bustling around like it was business as usual. Everything was fine. It was nothing to worry about, and they immediately made me feel relaxed. They confirmed that I would be receiving sedation, and they put a cannula in the back of my hand. I'm not sure if that happens only if you're receiving sedation or not, but I had the cannula put in there, and then at that point I believe the doctor came in and we had a quick chat. He explained the procedure, and they turned on the monitor which was up on a stand here. And at that point I asked if I would also be able to watch the procedure. So if you're somebody that's really interested in like medical dramas and in-depth medical procedures, I think you'll be really quite fascinated. So the monitor was angled so that I could see it and also the doctor could see it. If you're the type of person that's squeamish about that kind of thing, you're probably going to be best to close your eyes, because obviously the doctor needs to be able to see what's happening, and so there's not really a way of them angling the monitor away from you. But for myself, I was actually fascinated by the idea of being able to watch it. So they then administered the sedative, and it's not a general anaesthetic, so you don't go to sleep. I was awake, I was fully aware of what was happening, I could speak, I could watch the monitor, I knew what I was experiencing, but I just felt very, very relaxed, very, very calm, and almost like none of it was of any consequence. I couldn't have cared less, really. I was just very, very, very chill, very relaxed. Any stress that I'd had before the procedure was completely gone. Any anxiety that I had was completely gone. I was just going with it, and that's obviously what it's designed to do. So at that point I was asked to lie on my left side in the fetal position with my knees drawn up towards my chest to obviously allow the doctor the best access. And then I had, I believe, some kind of paper, like a paper roll over the top, which is, it's just kind of a modesty thing really, but by that time all modesty is gone really. And then the doctor gained access through the back of the shorts and used a lubricant around my bottom, and then he introduced the colonoscope, and it's mildly uncomfortable, not the most pleasant feeling, but nothing like what I was expecting. It passes through fairly quickly, fairly easily, and there were just a couple of places where, because of all the twists and turns and things, they have to be able to manoeuvre around where they need to get to. So I had to manoeuvre my position, so I started off on my left side, and I believed I was asked to move onto my back, which sounds odd because of where the colonoscope is, but it was to kind of get it round the corner, and that was probably the most uncomfortable part. Now, for anybody that suffers with IBS, I wouldn't say that it was any more uncomfortable than a general flare-up. For anybody that suffers with uncomfortable periods, it was like a very intense menstrual cramp, a very intense stomach cramp, and it lasted just a matter of seconds as he was kind of manoeuvring round. And then he was making very kind of positive noises as he was going through. Thankfully, he made it all the way to the cecum, which is as far as it can go, and then they withdraw the colonoscope very slowly, and that's when they're actually taking the images, which are going to be assessed afterwards. It definitely felt more comfortable on the way out than it did on the way in, even though it's going slower on the way out. And he also took a couple of biopsies, and I think I still can't decide if the reason I felt them is because I could see them being taken on the screen, so you can almost see like a little puncture happen and a little trail of blood, and at that point I felt like a very quick, intense, almost like a burning sensation. But I'm still not convinced whether I felt that because I saw it or whether I actually felt it. So maybe if I hadn't been watching, I may not have felt that, and I still can't decide whether or not it was a case of mind over matter. But I did feel him take the biopsies, only for a brief second, and then it seems to be over and done with very quickly. Now, according to the official report that was received after, they actually listed it as a 30-minute procedure. It did not feel like 30 minutes to me. Even though I was awake, I know I didn't fall asleep during the procedure. It's not that comfortable. I didn't feel as if I'd been lying on that bed in that position being violated for 30 minutes. That isn't how it felt at all. So if you do decide to opt for sedation, I can promise you it does feel like it's over very, very quickly. And in my experience, it was in no way as uncomfortable or embarrassing as I imagined it to be. And then once they've decided that they've seen as much as they need to see, or as much as they're able to see, they've taken any biopsies that they need to, then they withdraw the colonoscope very slowly, very gently, and it's all over and done with. And then I was handed a piece of kind of paper tissue to clear myself up. There was a little bit of discharge, there was a little bit of blood, nothing at all to worry about. I had actually worn a pad in my pants on the way there, so I would maybe recommend that for travelling home, because there can sometimes be a little bit of discharge, but it really wasn't anything to be overly concerned about. So then the next thing I remember was that I was on the ward in a bed with the cot sides up, and it was at that point that I realised why the intake nurse seemed to have been a little bit put out by the fact that I decided to opt for sedation. Because if you do opt for sedation, they do have to monitor you after the procedure. And as I was lying there in the bed, you get the electronic peg on your finger. I think it does your blood oxygen, and I had my blood pressure taken, and I think somebody came to do my blood pressure a couple of times because it was on the low side. My blood pressure is usually on the low side, but they weren't quite happy with how low it was, and I was left to rest. But at that point, there were lots and lots of other people coming through and being shown to a seated waiting area, being offered a drink, and then they were gone, and I was virtually the last person in there. And I realised at that point that that was why the nurse had seemed a little bit shirty about me receiving sedation, because it was delaying their departure. So I was probably one of the last people to still be on the ward, and everybody else seemed to be coming and going who'd obviously not had sedation. All power to them. Trust me, you're in no way better, worse, stronger, weaker for choosing one over the other. For me, I felt that that was the way I wanted to go. There were people in and out who obviously looked fine. They didn't look overly traumatised by the experience. Some of them had probably had colonoscopies, some of them had probably had endoscopies, and nobody looked much the worse for wear. But for my own peace of mind, for my own anxiety, for my own stress levels, I felt like it was right for me to opt for sedation, and if I was to have the procedure done again in the future, I would opt for sedation again. It did actually say on the form that I would be required to eat something before I left. Now that caused me a little bit of anxiety, obviously with being vegan, and I did make sure I had with me like an energy bar and like some trail mix and that kind of thing, so if they did insist that I ate something, I would have something with me to eat. And I believe I was offered a sandwich, which I declined, but I don't actually remember anybody coming and making me eat the things that I'd brought with me. So whether that was because at that point then they were starting to clear down, they were obviously all getting ready for leaving, everybody was busy, they were emptying bins and, you know, dealing with other patients and obviously winding down the clinic. So maybe that was why I wasn't asked to eat anything, but I did have a drink of water, and I felt a little bit tired, a little bit spacey, but not like I couldn't walk or move or anything. So I was probably about an hour, maybe a little bit longer, in the recovery area afterwards, and then I was taken through, I believe, back to the doctor that had done the procedure, and he went through everything on screen literally just in a matter of minutes and basically said that everything had looked normal, that he hadn't seen anything that was of concern, and that he would be sending the full detailed report to the GP, and from then on it would be down to my gastroenterologist and my GP to decide what happens next. So it was quite nice to hear on the day that everything looked relatively normal, and it did kind of help me relax then over the next few weeks until the full report had been received by my GP. So following my dismissal from the hospital, I was taken immediately home by my husband, and all I vaguely remember is cuddling up on the couch in the fetal position under a blanket with a wheat bag across my stomach. And I would say for the next 12 hours or so, I did experience very similar to an IBS style cramp, very similar to a menstrual cramp. Nothing that I felt I couldn't cope with, but it was there. And I slept for a couple of hours immediately after we got home. And I remember waking up feeling hungrier than I actually was. So I felt the need to eat lots of food, but I wasn't really able to manage very much. Now that could have been an effect of the fasting, it also could have been an effect of the sedation. But surprisingly, for somebody like myself that does have a very big appetite, I remember not really eating very much at all. So I did manage to sleep that night, and I did continue to use the wheat bag into the following day. And then a few weeks after that, I was actually issued a full copy of the report of the colonoscopy. This is my copy here, and I feel like we've reached the point in our relationship where I'm happy to share intimate photos of myself with you. Welcome to my colon, people. Now, to my untrained eye, it does look perfectly normal, perfectly healthy. There doesn't seem to be any areas of concern there for me, and that's pretty much what the report says. So the basic report on the back here is who, what, where, when, why. They explain that the findings were normal, that they were able to examine the colon fully to the cecum, which as far as they can possibly go. The quality of the bowel preparation was excellent. I could have told them that because there was no way there was anything left in there. After that bowel prep took effect, I was a costume of a woman. So I could have told them it was an excellent preparation. And they state that the medications, the sedation I was given is a combination of fentanyl and midazolam. And basically that's it. So this, in combination with all the other tests I had done, is what was led to my diagnosis of IBS-D. And from that point on, I was referred to a dietitian to begin the low FODMAP diet, and that was in autumn of 2017. I really hope that you found this useful, particularly if you have a colonoscopy booked or scheduled, or if it's something that you feel would be of benefit to you. I know that we went into a little bit too much detail in some parts, but I really do hope that it's helped alleviate any nerves, any anxiety, and just hearing somebody's real life experience can sometimes help much more than the description that's given in a leaflet. So I really hope you found this useful. If you have any questions for me at all, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comments box below, or if you'd rather message me privately, then feel free to email me at theirritablevegan@gmail.com, or you can also send me a private message over on Instagram. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.